Gators Breakdown episode 54 is ready to go. We're going to discuss Shannon saying he doesn't need stars for his defense, recruiting the quarterback Joe Milton, and of course, the real big story of the Gators basketball team reaching the Sweet 16. I'm your host, David Waters. You can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SEC. And my co-host joining me first is going to be Joey Vizzi. You can find Joey on Twitter at JoeyV_SEC Sports. And Bill Sykes will be joining us later for his stat rant, I guess we'll call it. You can find Bill on Twitter at RealBSykes. And remember, you can find all your Gators Breakdown episodes on SoundCloud, iTunes, and YouTube. Just search on those sites. Or get the links by following us on Twitter at Gators Breakdown. We're there on Facebook as well. And share the show if you like it. Leave a review to rate on iTunes. And Joey, it was an exciting weekend, but just in general, man, how you doing? Thanks for doing this once again.
Of course, as always. It's been a pleasure. It's been great that, we're going on, 8 months now since we started this thing back in the beginning of the football season. So I'm really looking forward to up ahead, but really excited to talk Gator hoops with you. Beginning of the show, big time this weekend. I mean, this was huge. We had talked about, I think last week or the week before, about the ceiling for Florida was probably the second weekend. The way things fell into place for the Gators this weekend, David, with other teams losing, I mean, this team realistically could be a Final Four team.
I mean, it's very realistic. I really think, looking at what they got coming up, Wisconsin's going to be, probably the toughest game, I think, out of the next two if they get past Wisconsin. I think we've already seen Florida versus South Carolina. If that's the upset there, of course, the SEC would love that. We get that there, or Baylor. So I think Baylor's a very athletic team, but, we'll kind of hit on that just a little bit. But, kind of just review a little bit, Joey. East Tennessee State, a lot of people were picking the upset. We told the people to be careful about that, and you about almost nailed the score on the head with that one.
I did. I said the Gators would win by 15. I think I was only a point or two off of what Florida ended up finishing scoring, and I'm pretty sure East Tennessee had exactly what I said they would score. That game was, started out, both teams kind of played the first half tight, and then Florida pulled away in the second half. But how about that game against Virginia? Just from start to finish, Florida dominated from the opening tip until the final, second of the game. I mean, Virginia didn't score a basket. Think about this, David. Virginia didn't score a basket for 5 minutes and 10 seconds at the end of that game. They went 5 minutes and 10 seconds scoreless at the end of that game. I mean, that's in an NCAA tournament game. I mean, that's almost unheard of. And especially for a team from the ACC that was a lot of people picked to beat Florida, as usual. So that was just an incredible game. I just can't believe how well Devin Robinson has been playing these last 2 weeks. You could argue he's been the MVP for Florida. And, a big shout out to Gorjak Gak out of Australia. Talk about coming out of nowhere off the bench to provide, quality minutes. He had 6 points and 2 rebounds as a backup center the other night. He's been huge. He had a foot injury for a lot of the season, so we really didn't get to see him much. But if you saw him in the beginning of the year and you see him now, he's put on about 30 pounds. Like a completely different player. I mean, he probably weighed 180 pounds soaking wet, and he's, 6'11" in the beginning of the year. Now he's probably up to about 220, 215. And, he's solid. I mean, providing you, 8 to 10 minutes a game of quality basketball, that's all you could ask for with John Igbunu out. Because like we talked about last week, what does that mean? That means that Skylar Rimmer does not have to come onto the court. And we don't want to see Skylar Rimmer come on the court. Got some stats here against Virginia. Devin Robinson, 14 points, 11 rebounds, double-double. Justin Leon, 14 points and 10 rebounds, double-double. Kavarius Hayes, 7 points, 2 rebounds. I said 6 points, 2 rebounds. What's up with Canyon Berry? Can we, send a search party out for him? Maybe put him on a milk carton or something, because he looks lost. I mean, he looks lost on defense. He looks lost on offense. I mean, if you notice, David, he barely saw the court against Virginia because I really think Mike White was afraid to put him out there. You know, and where's Kevon Allen? I mean, we out of him 4 points, 0 rebounds, and 1 assist. That's unacceptable. You know, obviously the game was well in hand on Saturday, but that's still unacceptable. I mean, your number one scorer on your team has 4 points, 0 rebounds, and 1 assist in an NCAA tournament game, in a second-round game. Man, I tell you what, though, you know what? That's what kind of gives me hope, though, David, is that these guys that are not scoring, that are supposed to be scoring, are not scoring, and everybody else is scoring. So, you know, maybe if they click on Friday and they click, maybe, you know, Florida could go off for, you know, 85, 90 points against Wisconsin.
Yeah, this team's going to be very dangerous with the guys we know their ability to score in Barry and Allen. If those guys come around and we get the type of game we know those guys can play, and the other guys who have shown up recently in Robinson and Chioza, Casey Hill to a point, you know, we still get good Casey, we still get bad Casey. But, you know, finally, you know, at the end of half against Virginia, I think we probably knew the game was going well in hand when he's keeping the ball on the last possession, but he dishes it off, gets an easy basket. Florida goes into halftime with even more momentum. But you know, but you got to speak to that defense too, holding Virginia to 29.6% shooting from the field. You know, it was Virginia who was coming in as the top-ranked defense in the nation. Kind of worried about how would this Florida offense score. You know, so you look at both sides of the court. You know, probably more impressive was the way Florida was able to score Virginia and that top-ranked defense, but also holding them to 29 points or 29%. I think it speaks a lot. Virginia did miss some open shots, don't get me wrong there, but the Florida defense was still going pretty good there. So I think if you look at a good stat that I saw, this was Florida's largest NCAA tournament win over a major conference team. Before this game, it was 26 in 2012, also against Virginia. So anytime Florida lines up against Virginia in the tournament, I think Florida can feel a little bit of confidence, and that might be a sign for good things to come. But, Joe, you mentioned it. It's just good to see, you know, Gak show up there and being able to put some quality minutes. You know, maybe I would love to see how far along he would have been if not for that foot injury, and how much quicker he would have been able to step in for Ibunu.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Florida has, you know, this team, you know, not looking too far ahead. We're still on this season, but next year, this team is going to have some pretty good size. You got Jarnell Stokes' little brother, Isaiah Stokes, coming in out of IMG Academy. He's 6'10", 6'9", 6'10". He's a dominant force. You got Ibunu coming back. You got Hayes coming back. You got Gak coming back. I mean, this team legit could have, you know, 4 guys, you know, 5 guys that are 6'9" and above. I mean, this is going to be a pretty dominant team in the paint next year, you know, barring, you know, nobody leaves. But like you said, David, about the defense, Virginia is known for controlling the pace of the game and the play. Florida made Virginia play to their pace. I mean, if you look at, you know, if you go back and watch the second half, Florida was running up and down the court on Virginia, and Virginia doesn't allow that to happen. They never do. And it was just incredible to see Florida control the pace of play when Virginia is known for that. And, you know, it really speaks to Mike White's coaching ability when he took, like you said, one of the top elite defenses in the country and made it non-existent. Florida was, you know, obviously Florida had a tough time scoring at times, but, you know, Florida put on an offensive clinic in the second half against Virginia. And that's because Virginia was straight out beat down and demoralized. You know, Florida took Virginia to the woodshed and bent them over their knee. And, you know, that's all there is to it. I mean, you can't really describe the game except using the word beat down, because that's what it was. Virginia looks like they tapped out. I mean, if you look, I remember when Devin Robinson pulled the little fake jab step. Ooh, yeah. And Virginia's player flew across the court, and he just sat there. He was like, well, I'm out. I'm done. You know, and instead of D-Rob pulling up on the open three, he tried to murder somebody. I mean, he tried to absolutely
by the way,
somebody.
I can't watch that play enough.
Yeah, and there's gifs of it, there's memes of it, it's all over the place. But I like, obviously we talked about that Virginia game. It was Florida showed out, but Wisconsin coming up, Big Ten team, very underrated. They played in the Big Ten championship game, obviously got beat by Michigan. I had this conversation with one of our fans on Twitter the last couple of days. I told him Michigan and Wisconsin were both good teams. He argued with me, and then this weekend in Wisconsin won both of their games, and he backtracked and moonwalked like Michael Jackson. So, I watch these games. I'm a basketball fanatic. And, Wisconsin and Michigan are good teams. Purdue's a good team. The Big Ten is top heavy, but those top 3 or 4 teams are good teams. And Florida's got their hands full, David, against Wisconsin. I mean,
Yep.
Four seniors. And all 4 of those seniors have played in 16 tournament games, David. 16 between all 4 of them. You got the big 4, Bronson Koenig, Nigel Hayes, Vito Brown, and Zach Showalter. All 4 of those guys, have been around the program and have experience.
Right, and you got to remember. Yeah, and Virginia's coming off beating defending national champ Villanova, so that was a big win for them. Joey, you think this is and I'll dive into Wisconsin a little bit too, but do you think this is is it a good matchup for Florida in some ways and a bad matchup in other ways? That's about kind of how I see it. Is Wisconsin in any kind of way like a Vanderbilt type for Florida that they have to worry about in that type of way?
Wisconsin won the game against Villanova, but they turned the ball over 14 times against Villanova. Villanova's defense isn't as good as Florida's defense. If Wisconsin turns the ball over 14 times against Florida, Florida will run away with this game. That's just how it's going to be. I really think that, Nigel Hayes is obviously going to present a problem, for Florida. You're probably going to end up seeing Rob on Nigel Hayes. Nigel Hayes finished with 19 points, 8 rebounds, and an assist against Villanova. Those are pretty good numbers. Bronson Koenig, who's their star guard, finished with 17 points, 1 rebound, and 1 assist. So they could score. And that's what Florida's going to have to prevent. Florida's going to have to play the defense that they played against Virginia. Obviously, Virginia doesn't have the offense Wisconsin does, but I still think if Florida plays defense the way they did on Saturday, I don't know how Wisconsin is going to score. Wisconsin's defense, like I said, is not as good as Virginia's defense. So if Florida can get 14 turnovers like Villanova did, I think Wisconsin, they're in big trouble, and I think Florida's going to win this game. But, who's going to show up for Florida, David? We just talked about this. Is the 3-point-1 rebound, 2 assist Casey Hill going to show up, or is the Casey Hill that, has, 12, 6, and 8 going to show up? So we just don't know. Is Canyon Barry going to have 7 points again, or is he going to have 16 points? That's the key. This team is so up and down. We just don't know.
Right, and that's been our biggest complaint. As good as Devin Robinson played, that's kind of been our complaint of him his whole career. It is, not one night it's what we've seen the last 2 games, and then another night it's where Robinson's only scoring 5 points a game and in foul trouble or whatever. So it'd be nice if Robinson can continue his postseason, being on fire. So I would love to see that from Robinson. We know the type of talent he has. He's really thought about going to the NBA last year. Thankfully, luckily, he came back. So I wonder if it's creeping in his head again with these performances. But it would be nice to see him, continue this along for the March Madness. But you mentioned Nigel Hayes for Wisconsin, one of the best players in the country in 5 postseason games, and that's counting the Big Ten and NCAA tournament. He's averaging 15.4 points a game, almost 10 rebounds a game, including 3 double-doubles in these games. He scored 19 points against Villanova. And then Bronson Koenig, also, for Wisconsin, he plays well. And it's going to also put Florida in some trouble. He made a school record 8 3-pointers and 28 points against Virginia Tech. And then he had 17 against Villanova. So in that game against Villanova, you mentioned how well they shot the ball, 53%. So, Wisconsin gets hot, and this Florida defense is really going to have to be, in about mid-season form where we saw them go on that winning streak there.
Yeah, this is Florida probably hasn't seen an offense like this, David, since Kentucky. Kentucky's offense is probably very comparable to Wisconsin's. And, and Florida's really going to have to think about, how they're going to play this team. Are they going to press, or are they going to, play a zone? Or what's Florida going to do? What's Mike White going to draw up on this team? Because, Wisconsin, if you play them out deep in the perimeter, they're going to feed it inside to, Vito Brown and Nigel Hayes. If you play inside and try to protect the rim, Big is going to step out and just knock down threes. So, Florida's really going to have to play their best defensive game, I think, all year to beat Wisconsin. Like I said, good thing Wisconsin has some trouble. I mean, if you go back and look at their numbers from all season, they've had some ball handling troubles. They do turn the ball over quite a bit. This isn't just an anomaly. I mean, this has been their rap all year. So, Florida really has to take advantage of that. But what I really want to know, David, is who's going to score for Florida. You obviously Justin Leon and D-Rob are balling, but there's still, 5 other guys that need to put the ball in the hoop, and they're just not doing it. Casey Hill obviously has been putting up stellar defensive efforts. We know that he's a stellar defensive point guard. That's what he is, but he still needs to be able to find the basket. And if he can't find the basket, he needs to get more than 2 assists. I mean, 2 assists for a pass first point guard, which he is, it needs to be more than that.
Agree. Completely agree there. So there we go, breaking down some Gators basketball. Joey, before we, give up on basketball, who would you rather play, South Carolina or Baylor? Does it matter? You want to play South Carolina because, the SEC, and we know Florida definitely knows South Carolina much more than they know Baylor. Or would you like to see Florida play somebody different and maybe match up against an athletic Baylor team that, in my opinion, will try and run the court too, which favors Florida a little bit more. But Baylor's a pretty athletic team.
I'd rather play Baylor, David. Because if South Carolina, wins beats Baylor on Friday, I really think South Carolina is going to the Final Four. They're on fire right now. I don't know what it is. They got something cooking, some mojo cooking right now, where they just got, Sedarius Thornwell. Goodness, did you watch him last night? Oh, he had the game of his life. I mean, he was almost unblockable. And that scares me. I mean, if you let that guy get hot, it's your lights out, So I'm a little nervous of South Carolina, David. And I really actually, as much as I'm an SEC guy and an SEC homer, I almost hope Baylor does beat South Carolina, because I don't want to see a hot South Carolina team, because if they can score with as good as their defense is, I just think they're going to be a tough out, and they could find themselves in the Final Four, at a snap of a finger. We know Frank Martin could coach, and he's got a pretty that's hot right now. Baylor, obviously, you said likes to run, and that plays into Florida's hands. We saw it happen with East Tennessee on Thursday. East Tennessee tried to run, and they couldn't run with Florida. Florida has athletes all over the court, and and I just would rather see Baylor, if you're asking me the truth.
Yeah. One more thing before we move on for basketball. Would you say how Florida had to start the season? The O-Dome was under renovation. They had to play neutral site games in Jacksonville, Tampa, Orlando, all over the state of Florida, even went to Madison Square Garden, where they're going to play this weekend. Do you think that plays into what we saw this past weekend? Because, they had to play so many neutral site games. They were kind of prepared for that. Do you think that played in any psyche that the Gators may have had this past weekend?
Oh, absolutely. I talked about this back in December. I said that playing Duke, Seton Hall, Gonzaga, early in the season at neutral sites, basically away games, even if they were in the state, because not only did it get them prepared for a tournament type style, game, it really brought this team together, because they didn't have a home crowd behind them to cheer them on. They basically, had a hostile crowd. I mean, Florida played Duke at a neutral site. It wasn't a neutral site, David. I mean, you saw Madison Square Garden. That's Duke's home away from home. All the Duke alumni that live in New York City, that was 90% Duke fans at Madison Square Garden that night. And I think it did nothing but help this team. And I think this team's going to go back to MSG this weekend, remembering what it was like being in a hostile crowd. And thank goodness Duke and Villanova are not still playing in this bracket, because Villanova has a huge New York City crowd base as well, even though it's located in Philadelphia. And, Philly's only a 3-hour drive from New York City. So, their fans would have traveled. I think if Villanova and Duke were still in this tournament, going into Madison Square Garden, I basically think Florida would have had away games, for their next 2 games. So I think obviously Wisconsin, Baylor, and South Carolina being there, I think Florida has a pretty much a 50-50 shot at having a fan base, with the other teams. Obviously Wisconsin travels, most Big Ten teams do, especially for basketball. But South Carolina and Baylor, their fans aren't going to travel. They just aren't. So I think, obviously Wisconsin's going to have a huge fan base, but I think on Sunday, if Florida wins on Friday night, whether it's Baylor or South Carolina, I think Florida's going to have the big advantage home crowd wise.
All right. So before I let you go, what's going to happen?
Oh man. Last week when we talked about East Tennessee, I was really confident, I said, it's not even a question, all these upset pickers, and it's just, and then I do want to get into this real quick before we get into predictions. It's sad to see these guys like Seth Davis, with their big mouths on television, get to basically say whatever they want, and act like they know it all. But when they're wrong, they're not wrong. They won't admit it. They'll sit there and be like, oh, I'm just on here to make picks. But yet they'll push it down your throat when they're trying to make an upset pick or, whatever. So, it was nice to shove it in Seth Davis's face on Thursday because basically Florida was his immediate first upset pick, was East Tennessee over Florida. He said it immediately when that game was announced. I like Florida just based on the fact that we haven't seen Florida's best offensive players get hot. Canyon Barry and Kayvon Allen have yet to get hot. So if they get hot, it's only logical and mathematically, reasonable to believe that Florida's going to score a lot of points and win this game, So I think that Florida wins. I think it's close. I think you're going to see a lot closer game than Florida's had the last 2 games. But I do think Florida wins. I think Wisconsin, if they continue the turnover that they've been having, I think Florida runs away with this game. I don't think it's even close, actually, but I do think it's a close game. I got Florida winning 71-60.
Say that one more time, Joey. 71 what?
71-66. Florida.
71-66. All right. There we go. Joey with his Gator prediction. He nailed the first round last week, so maybe we get lucky and Joey gets this one pretty close too. Joey, I'll probably join in right there with you. I see a close, hard-fought game toward their end, about a 5-point game, like you said. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of funny. I really agree with the reasoning you picked. Florida, best shooters, best players, haven't really got going yet. And I think, at least one of them probably turns it on, and it's enough for Florida to advance.
It's only going to take one game for Kayvon Allen to drop, 8 threes, and it's going to be game over and lights out. I mean, it really is. I mean, if Kayvon Allen gets hot, it's the other team might as well just mail it in.
All right, that's it for our Sweet 16 basketball talk. I think Joey, you're gonna scoot out of here, right?
I am. Good to see you, Bill. I'm sad. I'm sad that I won't be here to argue with you about everything.
Well, we'll rain check that for next time, buddy.
Yes, next week we will. We'll be close to wrapping up spring ball. So
that's right.
But yes, I will miss you, Bill.
All right, man. I'll talk to you soon.
All right, thanks, Joey.
All right, thanks, guys. Have a good night.
You too, man. Bill, how's it going?
It's going great, man. My wife made a good key lime pie tonight. I cooked burgers on the grill. It's off today. Life is good, man.
So that picture you sent was not a pastime from you grilling.
No, I had the grill, like smoke was funneling out of the chimney there, man. It was awesome.
All right. Ready to talk some Gators football?
Oh, you know I am, man. I've been chomping at the bit for this one.
Yeah, this was gonna be fun. Bill, I think his screen may have cracked. He's been typing so hard on Twitter. The spreadsheets have multiplied, and Bill's ready to go for this one.
My Twitter looks like that wheel they spin on The Price is Right. The numbers just going. You just see it on my phone, man. It's just scrolling.
Yeah, I keep seeing 20 plus on mine. I'm like, what in the world happened?
Yeah, we struck a nerve today.
We did. We did.
And to that end, I want to give a quick shout out to just a few of the guys that interacted with us today, man, because it was just so much fun, and I appreciate them. Even some of them agree with us, some of them don't, and just some good, respectful dialogue. At Gator Critic, at EB Payne 76, Shane Bias from UF Feeding Frenzy, who people should check out, and Eric at ESF 0242, among many others. Thanks, guys. We really appreciate you.
For sure. That's what makes it fun, and they give us a lot of things to think about, and we kind of just spread it here on this Gators Breakdown podcast. So this is Bill Sykes here joining us, and okay, Bill, it's soapbox time. There was a topic that kind of got you fired up over the weekend. Gators defensive coordinator Randy Shannon was discussing whether any defense will ever put as much talent on the field as his 2001 Miami unit. Shannon put out there that his Miami defense wasn't highly recruited. And then Zach Alberverdi of SEC Crunchy went on to say in an article he wrote, surprisingly, that production was not the result of assembling a ton of five-star talent, end quote. So Randy Shannon, you don't try to look at stars. I look at a guy who plays with a lot of high motor, that has a lot of fast twitch muscles in him and plays the game and loves the game. If you find guys like that all the time, you'll be successful. All the years I was at Miami, that's what we developed. You got to have confidence that if you find a guy that fits what you do, bring something to the table, you coach him, he's going to be a great player. And so to kind of finish Shannon's thoughts up, I don't know, it may happen, you never know. This is him talking about recruits. Here's the thing people don't realize. Those guys weren't highly recruited. People didn't realize back then. Here's one thing you've got to realize. Ed Reed was talented, but I think we had Tulane we had to beat. Then you start looking at William Joseph. I recruited him. We had nobody to beat. He was out of Miami Edison. He went first round. You've got John Vilma. I think maybe NC State was, he's saying they're in Miami battled NC State for John Vilma. It wasn't a lot of guys highly recruited, but those guys had the mentality. Bill, that sets the stage for you. Was Randy Shannon just kind of coach speak and spouting at the mouth here?
Yeah, okay, man, this article. Okay. Let me just first say, Randy Shannon, heck of a coach, and a lot of what he's saying is true here. Okay, they do not pull up scout rivals, ESPN 247 in the University of Florida football offices and say, man, I hope we get some of these 5 stars. Okay, I want to acknowledge that right off the bat. These guys are professional football coaches. They know what to look for in evaluations. They have a support staff, and there's third-party contractors. They evaluate separately. So no, technically, they don't go out and say, man, he's a 5-star. I want him. They watch tape. They interview these kids. There's visits. There's all kinds of things involved in this. But the inference of his words and the inference of the author of this article who advanced that inference is that it's not important to have those star players. And I have a big problem with that because the star rating system, the tiered rating system of recruits these days is showing year over year a correlation with success. I'm not arguing causation from correlation before somebody says that. What I'm telling you is that we can see now that the teams that are recruiting at a high level are the teams winning championships. And so when you say later on in the article about the 3- and 2-star linebackers and it make this inference, I think it's time to take a step back and say, okay, are these claims true? With that said, as much as there was some truth in Randy Shannon's words, there's also some loose grip on the facts here. And so we can call it alternative facts, and we're going to get into that in just a few minutes. But let me just first do this. Let me just give everybody a little historical synopsis of the recruiting industry, of what's happened in the past 20 years. Just to kind of set the stage for this, because this is like the first problem I have with this. What we're talking about here really is the early part of this millennium when Miami was rocking and rolling down there. They had that 2001 championship team, the 2002 title game appearance. They've kind of steadily tailed off towards then. But this article is specifically written about his 4 top 10 defenses from 2001 to 2006, which excludes 2005. But before that, the players that played on these teams, 2002 was really the advent of the corporate recruiting services. Rivals came along in 1998. And so they started doing top 100 lists, but the star system as we know it didn't exist like it does now in the 90s. You had them, you had the star ratings, but it was much more variable from service to service. The services were much more regionally based. You had like gurus like Tom Lemming, Bill Buchalter, Alan Wallace. You know, you had a lot of local newspaper involvement. You had magazines out there. And you saw a lot of things where you might see a top 100 nationally here and there, but you saw a lot of, this is the 56th best player in the South. This is the 5th best player in the Midwest. Much more regional. The best thing I can kind of make an analogy with is how professional wrestling started and they all kind of morphed into the WWF. That's how recruiting went. So we need to kind of consider that going forward as we kind of talk about some of these issues. It's kind of a misnomer because, yeah, of course, they weren't national unified star ratings for players in the mid to late 90s like they are now. They were there in their infantile stage, but not like a 247 composite. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay. So you want me to kind of lay out my issues now with this? I don't want to get too data heavy with everybody.
Well, I mean, I guess we could kind of start with, those are some big names he brought up. William Joseph, John Vilma, Ed Reed, and, I don't want to sit here and call Randy Shannon a liar by any means. I don't really kind of, I don't think that's what our point. We don't want to necessarily call him out or anything, but, we do want to point to, issues where these are better players than maybe, he's being he's leading on.
Yeah, and here's the thing. I don't either. And I get it. Okay, I get why he has to say certain things, and I get where he's coming from. And the fact of the matter is, he was there. Maybe these kids weren't recruited. Maybe none of the colleges want them. However, this article is an attack on the star rating system. It's an attack on fans' perception through that rating system of how good a player is and how important he is to a school. Does that make sense?
Yeah, because, what this article is saying is, and we've heard it many times, Florida gets the gyms, and they're going to win with these gyms. Have you seen the guys who've made the All-American list? Have you seen how these 3-star guys perform? Yeah, we see it. We know it. But we also keep going back to the point of we know what it takes to win. When Florida plays Alabama, we see what happens. When Florida plays FSU, we see what happens. They're getting the highly rated 4-stars, the 5-star guys. Florida's still not currently getting them. And what this kind of article is saying is, well, Florida maybe doesn't necessarily need them because these guys are performing at a high level. Well, you know what? It's not high enough.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, let's look at the facts. And one more kind of foundational contextual detail, and I know I'm kind of laying this whole framework out because I want to give you guys a good picture of how to view the numbers I'm about to give you. But that's the other thing is, yes, they found some 3-star gyms, just like, Muschamp found Gerard Davis and Quincy Wilson. It happens. Schools find highly rated players, that turn out to be studs. The difference is, does it happen at a frequency that can overcome mediocre recruiting? I say no. You can draw your own conclusions after this, but here's the facts. Randy Shannon talks about how William Joseph, nobody wanted him. Well, maybe they didn't. However, he was listed as the number 21 player in Florida by the Tampa Tribune newspaper. That's a mid to high 4-star grade. He was a member of the unordered Super Prep Florida Top 50, which Super Prep was one of the major recruiting services at the time. They said, hey, he's a top 50 player. That, in their mind, that's saying this is our version of a 4-star rating. He was on the All-Southeast recruit team by the National Recruiting Advisor. So you're talking about a guy that, by today's standards, this is clearly a 4-star recruit. This is not how he's the 12th best defensive tackle in the state. This is a guy that got regional and state attention, saying, hey, he's one of the best 25 kids in the country. He's one of the best 21 players, one of the best 50 players in the state. That's a 4-star. Then you go to Jonathan Vilma. Everybody's favorite to say, 3-star linebackers. Well, John Vilma was listed as a national top 60 player by Florida Prep Football Magazine. He was listed number 20 in Florida by the Miami Herald, who would probably know pretty well seeing him down there. And his bio on Hurricane Sports, where Randy Shannon says nobody wanted him, it says he was offered from both FSU and UF. Not all these buyers make audacious claims about offers. It went out of their way to mention them. So once again, this is a guy who claims he had offers from Florida State and Miami, and he's certainly not resting on the laurels of nobody wanted him and we found him. Miami's not either when they have reason to, because they could boast about that. And he has a grade that he's not only a number 20 in Florida, which is a mid to high 4-star grade, but a top 60 nationally. That's a guy who was on, if he was up another 30 spots, is a 5-star. So, okay, I wasn't there. All I'm telling you is if nobody wanted him, it was in disagreement with the recruiting publications at the time. They seem to think that these kids were 4-star players. Now, Ed Reed, okay, you found him. I don't know what was going on there. But again, his bio says he had an offer from LSU, and he was from the state of Louisiana. And with their typical closed gates, that's not surprising. I mean, you know how it is out there, especially back then. So these claims he's making about these players, it just doesn't match with the facts. And this is, from their personal bios.
Yeah, I mean, I think, what you go and I think what we keep seeing is, according to Randy Shannon, the different articles out there, one in particular we keep going written to, the production of the top 10 defense from Randy Shannon was, quote, was not the result of assembling a ton of 5-star talent. Was that an out for Randy Shannon or for the author of the article? Is that, I mean, how do we look at that?
That was not a statement from Shannon.
Right.
That was Zach Abolverdi that stated that. Yeah. And in my response to that, when he says it was not a result of assembling a ton of 5-star talent, I think that's a carefully nuanced out. That's exactly what that is. So he can say, oh, you kind of point to the Alabama model. They didn't do it that way. They did the inference is they did it with the 2s and 3 stars there. But he, I'm sure he would back away from it and say, well, I didn't say that they recruited subpar because he kind of set the bar so high. And so technically that is true. Miami didn't win by having a ton, air quotes, if you can see me on camera, of 5-stars on defense. But who does? Other than Alabama, even, Florida's national championships, you might have had 1, 2, 3 5-stars, and you're surrounding them by mid to high level 4-stars typically. Now, obviously, you do have those 3 stars that pan out. There are occasional, but you build the meat of your defense and your offense with a few 5-stars and high 4-stars. So what we have to do and take that statement and its inference and say, well, did Miami have this subpar recruiting? They found all these hidden gems, or did they have 5-stars peppered across the roster with mid to high
because
level?
What we keep hearing and the way it sounds is, he built this defense just like he's building Florida, and they're not getting the top of the top.
Oh yeah, and wait till I get to the linebackers. But for now, let's just suffice to say this. Every one of the 4 reference defenses that he listed, those top 10 defenses, every one of them had key contributions from 5-star athletes. Like the number 1 overall player in the country, I believe it was of the year 2000, DJ Williams, at the head of the Rivals 100. How about 5-star safety Kenny Phillips, 5-star defensive tackle Ryan Harris, DB Antrell Roll, who was either a 4 or 5-star, depending on what publication you went with at the time. And then the defense that was sandwiched between those that was not a top 10 had 5-star contributors in Leon Williams, that was the number 1 linebacker in the country, and Devin Hester, who played some DB as well as a returner there, that was a 5-star. So that's just not true. It's just not true. And then if you go down and say, okay, where was it just a few of those 5-stars and some unheralded recruits that nobody wanted? No. No. You go to every level, defensive tackle, defensive end, linebacker, DB. You got guys like Kareem Brown, Calais Campbell, John Beason, Vince Wilford, Mike Rumpf, Andrew Williams, Maury Sykes. These are from these defenses. I went back and I looked at, the stats, and I looked at the depth chart. Now, I couldn't find stats behind 2003. So I've got stats for 2003, 2005, and 2006. It was actually 2004 was the one that was not a top 10. And 2005 kind of skewed a little heavy on the 3-stars because they had a walk-on named Javon Nanton. He came on as a track athlete, and he led the team in sacks with 6.5 sacks and in 2005. And he was a big presence for a few years, even in 2003. But they didn't offer that guy either. It's not like they found a hidden gem either. He was a walk-on. But you go to 2006, it's dominated by 4 and 5 stars. 2003, had those guys, DJ Williams and John Villman, Vince Wilford, and Sean Taylor is another one. They like to claim him as a hidden gem. Super Prep All-American, Super Prep number 23 in Florida, number 14 in Florida by Gainesville Sun, number 1 athlete times Union 75. It's just all over this place. You see that the pattern is still the same. while there wasn't a consensus 2-4-7 composite, you have your linchpins at the 5-star at the key positions, and then you backfill them with, mostly mid to high level 4-stars, and then a few sleeper 3-stars. And in Miami's case, they did get an Ed Reed, they did get a Javon Nanton. They got a few of these guys to pepper in there with them, and it put them over the top. It did. But just to say they got their production from these lower rated guys, it's just not true. And the other thing I think is worth mentioning here, when we see 2002 come about, that watershed moment when the corporate services rivals, they still maintain their rankings, and 2-4-7 kind of ports those over, but it's that intact historical record. Once we get that cycle of those players going through, and in 2006, when we've had a 4-year cycle of these actual ranked and ordered players coming through, by that year, you can see Miami's defense, which was top 10, completely dominated, to the point where, their top 3 defenders were top 3 in sacks were 4-stars. Their top 2, which is they only had 2 players with more than 1 interception, was a 5-star and a 4-star. And in tackles, you did have a 3-star come in second with Brandon Merriweather, but the rest of the top 4 were a 4-star, 4-star, and a 5-star. So what we would expect, if those rankings are accurate, starts to flesh out as the ranking system establishes some history. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah.
So it's just not a true statement. Why he wrote it, it could just be an innocent error, but it ain't true.
So you had some stuff on the linebackers. I mean, we know the names: David Reese, Jeremiah Moon, Colin Johnson, the lowly rated linebacker recruits Florida has that have played really, really well. The Sean Joseph is another one. Low rated, for the most part, low rated recruits, linebacker recruits from Florida. That's kind of one position that a lot of people are pointing to for the underrated guys, and then point to them saying the stars don't matter. We know Randy Shannon knows how to coach linebackers. We've seen it last year with these underrated guys. But he had a lot to work with in his Miami days of those top classes and some top tier linebackers there as well. So, actually, in a way, if you want to kind of see what I think Randy Shannon is doing, I think he's actually proving himself that he is a good coach. He is. We've seen him on the Miami side, and Bill, I think you'll point to this. He was getting higher rated recruited than what they make it sound like, but we've also seen how he can up his ante, and we see these lower rated linebackers from Florida actually do some things.
Yeah, listen, the guy's a good coach, good recruiter. I'm not saying he's lit the world on fire at Florida, but I think there's other issues there that he's trying to overcome. And in no way am I trying to knock Randy Shannon for what he accomplished at Miami, or hopefully he's in the process of accomplishing at Florida. But this article, and I don't even fault him for the coach speak. He's got to play the game,
Yeah.
I mean, he just has to. I don't like the way this article is framed as, it's wrong. And then when you juxtapose these statements and then write something like, this is great because Florida's linebackers, I know the author would deny it all day long. That's what he meant, but it's obviously what he's inferring. And Lord have mercy. I'm sorry if you're into the whole we're going to load up on 2- and 3-star linebackers like Miami and do what they did. Yes, he did. He did have a couple of other 3-star linebackers that made the NFL that were good that I haven't mentioned, just not in these defenses. But I'm here to drop some facts. That's what you people tune in for. I'm going to call it like it is. Here it is. This is the facts of Randy Shannon's linebackers from 2001 to 2010, which includes all his years at Miami as a defensive coordinator, head coach. Fact number 1, they signed 8 linebackers in 8 of the 10 classes he was there. There was 2 years they just didn't sign a linebacker. Number 2, they signed the national number 1 linebacker in the country 4 times out of those 10 years. 4 times. Actually, I would expand that to 11 years. It was year 2000 when they got DJ Williams, so I did add 1 extra year there. Number 3, they signed a 4- or 5-star linebacker in 7 of those 8 linebacker groups. There was only 1 time when it didn't include a 4- or 5-star linebacker, and that was the very last year before he got fired, as his recruiting prowess was fading off. That happens, or the momentum. He's running out of gas there. He couldn't get one. Every other class had a 4- or 5-star linebacker when they signed the linebacker. Number 5, 44% of the linebackers he signed in those classes were rated in the top 10 of their position nationally. Top 10 linebackers. 44%, almost half the time. let's see, 48% of those, including 2000, and I might be off on this, were 4 or 5 stars. I'm going to kind of just check that one. I want to double check that one. Number 7, the last class in 2010, as I mentioned, was it had 4 3-stars, and the only 2-star of the era was 2010. And so if you take that, that negatively skews the numbers. If you take that out, it looks even more, just even more impressive. And then fact number 8, multiple in-state publications, as I said, had John Vilma ranked as a 4-star level. So if you take that away and you say, okay, well, if we're throwing John Vilma in there as a 4-star, suddenly as you scan across, you might see 1 or 2 guys that rose up from the ashes of the 3-star heat to stardom. But otherwise, they dominated with blue chip linebackers. If we're going to expect the same thing from Randy, we can't really. I mean, I don't see how we can expect him to have the same results with different tools. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yep.
These aren't the same kids that we're bringing in. However, could we have another Gerard Davis in the last 2 classes? Sure, we could have 3 of them. But what I'm telling you is the historical precedent that people are pointing to from those players and from this recruiting history account, it's not there. It's a myth. It just didn't happen. The guy won with some awesome talent. I mean, if you look at their 5-star totals as a team, they signed 23 5-stars between 2001 and 2017. And this is important to understand. When he was there as a defensive coordinator, they were signing over 2.5 a year. Now that dropped from 1 a year when he was a head coach, and now it's down to 0.6 since he was a head coach, because their recruiting has tailed off. And guess what else has tailed off? Their championships. You know, they haven't won the ACC that I've seen. They won the last Big East in 2002, had the national championship in 2001, and lo and behold, you look at their 02 to 06 averages for their national class rank, 6.6 nationally. You know, from 2007 to 2010, it falls off to 11 nationally. 11 to 17 to this past class, it's fallen all the way down to 18.4 nationally. Yet again, a correlation between class rank and success. And most damning to this idea of they recruited with mediocre classes, they had the number 2 class in 2001. So they had those freshmen coming in to help. They had the number 8 class in 1999 and the number 9 class in 2000. That's per Clay Travis. I found an article with that in there. So they had 3 top 10 classes on the roster when they won that national championship. Hadn't won one since.
Just one more example, like you said, Bill. A top recruiting class doesn't necessarily mean you're going to win, but pretty much, as we keep saying, this is a prerequisite for getting in that championship.
Yeah, and you know, listen, man, I'm all for the idea that we're gonna outcoach people, but you can't expect your coach to be outgunned each and every week in America's best conference and come out on top. And all I'm saying is we have a lot to be excited about with Gator football right now. There's some good things happening, but people shouldn't be writing things that aren't true. We need to be able to identify coach speak when it's coach speak. I love the way Thomas Goldcamp handled this. He took these same quotes and said, "Hey, fans, what do you think of these statements?"
Have at it.
That's how you handle this. You don't write. Surprisingly, they won with a bag of rocks and a loaf of bread. No, they didn't. Okay, no, they just didn't.
Yeah, and Thomas, you know, to his point, and I'll take some numbers from his. It wasn't a VIP article from 24/7, so I feel like I can share here. Will Muschamp's 4 defensive recruiting classes at Florida included 31 blue chip prospects, that's 4 or 5-star recruits, and just 14 non-blue chippers. So that's 69% total of the defense, 4 or 5 stars. For Jim McElwain in his first 3 signing classes, just 11 blue chippers to 24 non-blue chippers. So only 11 4 or 5-star recruits, and that percentage is only 31%. So 69 for Muschamp's defenses and 31% for Jim McElwain's defenses.
Yeah, and I was almost hesitant to harp on this. I mean, it's got to get better. It is improving. It's got to get better. We got the coaches now. That whole thing is hopefully mostly taken care of. I'm all for McElwain. I'm all for the staff. I'm all for Randy Shannon. I can't wait to see his 4-3, even though I want a nickel. You know, I prefer the nickel, but I'm eager to see what he can do, and I believe these guys are great coaches. But I'm just telling you guys, be careful what you read out there, and it's just not how it is. I feel an obligation to share it with the fans. Take it or leave it.
There we go. So now to the next topic. The man of the hour, it kind of seems, Bill. We knew this was coming, but we kind of got excited that, finally the Gators offered quarterback for 2018, Joe Milton. We've waited for this one to happen, and it really looks like to me that the coaches really wanted to see and do this in person. Milton visited campus last week, watched some spring practice, met with the coaches, walked out with an offer. Most have Florida getting him as it stands right now. But when it's all said and done, most think he'll be a Gator. I've been told from a couple different sources, connected to Florida, not connected to Florida, that most think that he will be a Gator. So now the question I pose to you, if Florida slow play him for other quarterbacks, and what are the chances Florida takes or gets 2 quarterbacks in this class, and should they?
Well, first of all, when you say slow play, we tend to have these this imagery associated with these terms like slow play, or when people say he's a B-lister. Well, yeah. I suspect Trevor Lawrence was probably the number 1 target in the country, and if they felt like they were going to get that guy, and if they're only taking 1, then everybody else in the country is a B-lister. So you got to be careful, like saying, did they slow play him? Well, yeah, they may have waited a month so they figure out what was going on with the number 1 guy in the country. I don't know. They may not have waited. But I think a lot of that just really had to do with they probably wanted to do their homework. The guy did not put up a lot of big numbers last year on the field, and so they probably just wanted to make a thorough decision on him, maybe meet him in person like they did. Slow play like people think? No, I don't think so. Slow play in reality, in some ways, yes. I just don't think that's a bad thing at all. I wouldn't bat an eye at that. As far as taking 2 quarterbacks, though, so I'm sorry. Go ahead. We'll address that in a minute.
Yeah, I mean, for the slow play part, I guess if you listen to how some people want to perceive it or how some people want to spin it, maybe Florida got bad word from another quarterback. We know they moved on from Artur Sitkowski. That's done, over with. As far as decision, it kind of happened around the same time Joe Milton was blowing up in that Orlando camp that we know of. That's kind of when he blew up on the scene as of probably a month ago. Florida moved on from Sitkowski, and then we kind of heard the other names, Justin Fields, Emory Jones, Dorian Thompson-Robinson. Those are the 3 guys there where Florida probably had higher on the list originally than Milton. I think if you look at those 3 guys, I still think Justin Fields is probably one of the guys. If they can't get Trevor Lawrence, of course, they're more than likely they're not. We can move on from that. They're really going to try hard and flip Fields, but how does it work? If they offer Milton, is there still a chance where Fields is in play or one of these other quarterbacks that I mentioned? What happens here? Is there a chance they take 2? Do these guys do they play the game and see who commits first? I think that's part of the reason why this slow play comes into play is because what happens with the other quarterbacks Florida is recruiting.
Yeah, I listen, as far as that goes, yes, they need to take more quarterbacks. We had talked about this. They haven't taken it enough since McElwain's been there. We haven't taken enough since 2010 as far as quality arms. This is not all on McElwain. He needs to keep chasing and getting more than 1 guy in there. There's, even with the kind of strange situations around Trask right now, I think there's a good chance he transfers out. You're not going to fix the hole they have there by putting exactly what you hope to gain when you have a situation where there's natural attrition. Not everybody you bring in is going to stick around, and so you can't plan on having just enough. Does that make sense?
Yep.
I mean, they've got to throw some numbers there. And I'm going to throw a term out there since I've already made everybody mad tonight. I think Joe Milton's a project. I do. Or at least an unknown. There's a potential. That's a better way of saying it. He's an unknown with the potential to be a project. They're going to need to bring somebody else in if they can. I don't think you just go out and find whatever, rag arm coach's son you can find. But I think if you have a chance at Fields, you need that guy. And for more than just the reason of finding somebody that fits, you need a game changer there. And if they have a chance to bring in somebody like Fields that can really change the program, and I think that guy can, and be a spark to the program, not just the offense, then you have to do it. And if somebody's feelings get hurt in the process, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was kind of talking to someone about both of those guys together, and the way I see it now, Fields is, if you're just going to give me the baseline, that's who I want. And if I say compare him to Milton right now, I don't think is on that level, but I do think he can be. So I think that's kind of, where you're pointing. Maybe Fields is already there, but Milton,
Sure.
Has the chance to be there. Now, we don't know. I mean, these are high school recruits. Will they get on campus? This is all could change. And this is kind of just how we see it now. But, right now, I just think Fields kind of is the baseline of where I'd like to start, and then Milton can eventually end up there.
Yeah, and hey, listen, if I sound like I'm down on Milton, maybe it's just my hangover with Zach Appleverde. But listen, I think Milton could be just tremendous. And I'm going to talk about with you some of the negatives and positives that we get through with this guy, because he's a little bit of a mystery. But there's a lot to like with this kid. And I think with the way he's building some buzz in state, he's almost a must-have. And so that's what I would say. He's a must-get for Florida, not only a must-take, but a must-get for recruiting purposes to get his arm and his release into camp and what I think could develop into a real swagger. But I think that Justin Fields is a must-chase. You must take Milton, but you must keep chasing Fields, because if you land them both, I think you got about a 75% chance you've just found a franchise quarterback.
Yeah, and for one thing, if there's somehow, some way you can pull both, it probably keeps one of them away from Florida State as well.
Yeah, and they've got to stop thinking about that, because, we've heard a lot of fans say, oh, well, McElwain tried to get Lamar Jackson. Well, Louisville kept him away from us. It's not that they got him, we lost him. And the same thing with DeAndre Francois at Florida State, who's going to be key to this discussion in a minute. We've got to start depriving the enemy and restocking our old cupboards. It's got to happen.
So, Bill, when we look at Milton, and I worked with a 7-on-7 coach who's been around Milton a few times this spring. He says the cannon on that boy's arm is real. I mean, you look at his wingspan, you can definitely see why he can, why he can throw the ball. What it looks like, 70, 80 yards. Now I'm kind of exaggerating there, but probably not far off. But he makes it. I mean, the cannon is real. He makes it look effortless in how he can sling the ball. We've seen on his film that he can sling it, and there's a lot of those type of throws in his film where everything is downfield. But what this coach tells me, and Milton has even said it himself, is that he needs to work on the short and intermediate passing game, and that is the next step in his game to become a complete quarterback. This is a big emphasis, and it's what he wants to work on from now until he steps on a college campus. This is where his accuracy needs to improve. And I love the fact that, and he said it himself now, he's not comparing himself to the name he'll bring up is Tom Brady. And what he says he likes about Tom Brady is how Tom Brady picks people apart. And that's why he wants to work on this short to intermediate game, is because that's how you beat defenses nowadays. The big play, you can't just live off of that. You have to sustain drives. You have to convert your 3rd and 4th, 3rd and 5s. And those are not deep pass plays. You have to keep the chains moving. Milton sees that. He wants to work on that. So, Bill, looking at that, we know the long ball can't succeed time and time again. But is there something or other players, and you mentioned DeAndre Francois, that we can look at where maybe he can model his game after?
Yeah, I think that's something that he's going to have to work out. The good news is that he has a very similar trajectory stat-wise as DeAndre Francois. I mean, to me, he's the guy I'd be emulating. They're both quarterbacks that started at Orlando Olympia High School. DeAndre Francois actually did leave there and go to IMG for his senior year. And, I did some comparison between the two quarterbacks. And while Joe Milton only threw for 1,543 yards as a junior in 2016, well, DeAndre Francois only threw for 1,373 at the same school. And so I got to looking into this, and apparently this school has kind of struggled on the field. Their coach has only been there since 2015 because they hit rock bottom in 2014. they're not an offensive juggernaut. And if it's me and I'm Joe Milton and these coaches are asking me about my lack of a short intermediate passing game, I'm probably talking to my coach and saying, hey, help me get better. But can you please point out that another quarterback who's now having success, had the same struggles? I don't know that it's all Joe Milton. I do think he's got to get better. And we'll talk about some of the stats here in a second, but I'm looking at DeAndre Francois to answer your question. That's the guy I'm not only pointing myself to, but I'm pointing recruiters to get some offers.
Yeah, you mentioned he was 82 of 178 for about 1,500 yards his junior year, 17 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. His longest pass was a 76-yarder. But if you also look at his rushing stats, and he is labeled a dual threat, but he is a pass first. We've talked about this before, a pass first dual threat. He runs about a 4.8 40. He says it himself. It's fast enough to get where he needs to go. So I like that mindset of him. He seems to have a good head on his shoulders there about what it takes to be successful at the quarterback position. But not a lot of 56 carries for 42 yards. I'm sure sacks and stuff are involved in that, but he's not a big time runner.
No, he's not. And I just don't even like the word dual threat with this guy. He's a guy that's
but he does. I did see an article where he does like the label.
Well, okay, fine, Joe, you're a dual threat. But no, he's a guy that's going to stand in the pocket, and if you look on film, there's times when he doesn't take off when he could. I mean, he has less than 100 yards rushing a season. I'm sorry. In reality, that's not a dual threat, but he is mobile like maybe Aaron Murray. He's a guy that, he's not going to take off and run unless you absolutely make him, but he might run for 25 yards when he does a few times a game. Again, that hasn't even happened, but I think it could happen. He's got the agility for it.
So, we mentioned, of course, if he commits first, do you think it scares other quarterbacks off? I hate to say, these guys would be afraid of competition, but if Milton is the only quarterback, he'll probably be a 4-star when it's all said and done. If his trajectory keeps going like it is, would it be any type of worry? And you've already kind of answered this. If he is the only quarterback taken, and other guys are just kind of scared off by him committing first.
I think the better question is the University of Florida in a position to pass up an arm talent like Joe Milton for fear of scaring off Justin Fields, who's out of state and committed elsewhere, and has Georgia in hot pursuit of him?
Yeah,
I don't think they have that luxury. I think, maybe they're scared off, maybe they aren't, but you need an alpha male that's going to come in there and take the job anyway. So, especially if there's so many out-of-state quarterbacks that they're chasing, and this is getting to kind of middle of the road to late in the game for quarterback commitments because they do commit so early, and you got to take that guy. You can't be afraid. It's just, I don't know. I don't think you wait around on a bunch of out-of-state kids that are committed elsewhere. I'm sorry.
Yeah, to me, they offered him, so Florida has to be ready for him to commit. He, I think, mentioned he wants to commit before the summer, so we're probably looking, a month or two at the latest, before he makes a decision. So, Bill, could this be a signifier of recruits? Could this be a spark in recruiting? If Milton, keeps continuing on this camp circuit and blows it up, he'll do some over the summer as well. And if he has a big senior year and Florida has a good season on the field, this could be the spark that could really, really light some offensive recruiting for the Gators.
Yeah, yes, there's so many unknowns with this kid because of the school he hails from, because he hasn't put up a lot of stats, because he has such a good long ball and a good release, and we see that the tools are there. If he comes out there, and especially if there's marked improvement on the field this year, and I believe he's an Under Armour All-American, isn't that right? If he's not, if he does end up making that team and goes with these kids and says, hey, look at me, and shows that he's an alpha at that game, you're daggum right it could be. They could really draw in some talent with him.
Anything else right there on Milton before we wrap this one up?
Yes, the stat to watch for everybody. I did some analysis of this because what you see on his tape, I meant to mention this earlier, we see him just these beautiful deep passes, even when things are breaking down to the street ball. He can throw it underarm or behind his back or whatever, and it just arcs beautifully to the end zone for a 50-yard pass. That's great. But as you said, we don't see a lot of the short intermediate passes. We don't see him reading through progressions. I see him locking on sometimes in the limited film I've seen. So I did some math. When you look at the long throws he's had, there's a lot of 40, 60, 70-yard throws in these games, and that's great. I love a 70-yard pass. But I went and said, with such a low total, what is the percentage of the total passing yards he has that his longest throw of each game constitutes? And his sophomore year, that was 37%. So almost 40% of his yards were coming on one throw a game. That's a little sketchy, especially when you carry that over and compare it to DeAndre Francois, who at IMG, it was only 29%. Justin Fields last year was only 19%. It's just too high. That means you're just getting it in a few big chunks. You're not going for 20 passes a game. I think the most he completed he had one game as a sophomore when he completed 18. Everything else, there was a few of 12 and 13 and a lot of single-digit completions. But he got better. As a junior, that dropped to 32%. Still didn't have a lot of completions. He only had 82 completions, and that actually fell. But we need to watch that. I want to see that come down. I want to see it at least in the 20s, or at least high 20s. I'd like to see it compared to what DeAndre Francois was. Let's see this guy throwing 10 and 15-yard strikes, methodically leading an offense, reading through progressions. That's a stat to watch. Percentage of total yards comprised by one through a game.
I'd like to go back and look at Felipe Franks on that. We'll have to do that for the next episode, because if you go back and look at his film, we saw a lot of bombs over and over again as well in the highlight film. The huddles and all that. So it would probably take a little bit more diving in to see that. But I think Felipe Franks, it would be nice to see what Franks was too, because if I remember right and going back and looking at his film, there were a lot of downfield passes there as well.
And that's not a bad comparison. I mean, he's another guy with a really big frame, a really big arm, not a lot of coaching yet, and that's in no way criticism of his current head coach, but just a program I think they're in Milton's case that's still getting their feet under them as a football program, and I think that with the right coaching, he might really take off.
Yeah, I'd be more than happy, and I'd be ecstatic if he committed to Florida.
Me too.
Sometime soon. I just really think, and you mentioned it, the potential is really there for him to be a big time player.
Yeah, and hey, what does that say when Olympia has their next quarterback come through, and a lot of people had him pegged for FSU and still might, even though he doesn't have the offer from them yet. They may be planning to swoop in late.
I think he visited there today, I believe. So
he may have, yeah, and he may end up there. This is not a slam dunk, but they got to be thinking that and telling him, hey, you're the next DeAndre Francois.
Yeah, well, I mean, if they can pull your stats and use the comparison, then maybe so.
Right, and the thing is, if Florida can take that guy away, that sends a message. Hey, we're the new sheriff at Olympia High School. Get out. And that's something that will reverberate through recruiting circles.
For sure. I mean, yeah, I even said, spark recruiting for other recruits, but also, maybe just put a little chink in the armor, as you mentioned, in that FSU recruiting.
Oh, yeah. That's something that's got to be done, as we've talked about. That's the arch enemy. It always is, but FSU has got to give us some ground back. We got to take it. If Florida can't go out and start getting some recruits from them, we're in trouble.
There we go. So that's about it for the show. We looked at the Gators in the Sweet 16. Randy Shannon, and kind of debunking the myth that he didn't have highly rated recruits, as some people were spewing out there, and dove into Joe Milton and how he can improve this Florida offense and what it means, what the offer means for him and other quarterbacks the Gators are chasing. So, Bill, anything else before we wrap it up here?
No, I believe it was a guy from the Gators 24/7 board, Alligator Alley, MJ22, that was saying how much he loved the show, and it was his birthday last week. So happy birthday, buddy.
There we go.
Thanks for listening. And also follow me on Twitter at RealBSykes, and that's SIKES, Real B Sykes.
That's right. I'm David Waters. You can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SEC. And Joey, who joined us earlier to talk some Gator basketball, at Joey V_SEC Sports. Remember to subscribe and share off of iTunes. Leave a review if you like Gators Breakdown. You'll find this audio version after this watching live on video now, but you can find the audio version on SoundCloud about 30 minutes after this show. So for Bill and Joey, I'm Dave. Thanks for listening to Gators Breakdown.